Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew McClendon. I'm the director and CEO here at the McNay. Thank you for joining us this evening, both in person and online, for an engaging conversation with brothers Einar and Jamex de la Torre as they discuss their exhibition, Upward Mobility and Their Careers. They are joined this evening for the conversation by the exhibition's curators, Renee Paul Barrio, head of curatorial affairs, Lauren Thompson, curator of exhibitions, and Mia Lopez, curator of Latinx art. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of the exhibition and of programming. Lead funding for the de la Torre Brothers Upward Mobility is most generously provided by the Elizabeth Huth Coach Charitable Foundation of 1992. Major funding is provided by the Brown Foundation, Sims Foundation, Inc., Frost Bank, the Joan and Herb Kelleher Foundation, and Humanities Texas. We are grateful to the members of the exhibition host committee chaired by Kathy and Lionel Sosa. Thank you to all the McNay staff members who brought us together for this fantastic event, and especially to our teen art guides for helping us tonight. We have a few housekeeping items before we dive in. We welcome your questions throughout this talk, and we are trying out some new technology to hopefully make Q&A a more dynamic part of the evening. So thank you for your patience. To submit questions, please use the Canva Live link if you're online, or the QR code that you see on the screen or saw as you were checking in. Our curators will be checking in on your questions throughout the discussion, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible throughout the duration. We also encourage you to tag us in your social media posts. Please tag McNay Art, at McNay Art, excuse me. As always, we are pleased to engage a diverse community in the discovery and the enjoyment of the visual arts. Thank you for supporting the McNay, and I hope you enjoy the evening. And I'll now turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. It's such a pleasure to see so many people here tonight. It's really exciting. And it is a pleasure to welcome the brothers back to San Antonio. They were here earlier this year and created an amazing installation for the McNay. And it's just wonderful to hear that now that everyone's had a chance to see the exhibition, to now hear from them directly, and along with my colleagues here, Mia and Lauren. So we're just going to kind of jump right in. What we're going to do tonight is take a look at the work, not from perspective of the audience walking through the exhibition, but more chronologically. So we're going to start with early work, and we're going to work our way forward, so we get a sense of how the brothers developed over time. And we're going to weave into that stories about the McNay's exhibition and how that came together, and also about their own history and how their history informs the work they do. So we're going to start just by, I just want to have you tell us a little about your background growing up. I know that your childhood in California and Mexico really influenced the work you're doing now. So let's start right there.
Well, we're from Guadalajara originally. We went to an all-boys Catholic school, Maristas, or Maryknoll or something like that in English. So moving in 1972, moving to Dana Point, home of Hobie Cat and surfing and so on. We were very, very intrigued because it was co-ed with mini skirts and hot pants. And I think that culture shock was very welcome.
How old were you when you moved?
I was 12 and Einar was 8. So we literally grew up in both sides. So that really informs greatly how we operate. And nowadays we also live in both sides. So
where do you live?
We live in San Diego and in the Valle de Guadalupe near Ensenada, which is now the wine country in Ensenada.
And I know when you were here working, we talked about kind of being not in any one place, but kind of between places. How does that inform the work?
Well, I think that we were Mexicans in Mexico and Americans in the United States, and that we soon realized that that to be self-defined was to be self-limiting, because we wanted to be things we hadn't been. And we feel that way as we travel and we do projects abroad. I want to be from there too. And so I feel like, why not? Why, if because we're here so superficially anyway. No, we're not here for very long, to be frank. So I think it's better to see yourself as a member of a bigger thing than to be so specific. Not that you don't have anything that pins you to where you're from and childhood memories, but just in terms of being an artist and being able to basically appropriate anything you want.
We're going to start. My clicker's not working.
I have a question.
Oh, we have a question.
So,
Here.
how would you say that over time your creativity has evolved and your sources of inspiration?
Well, we went to Long Beach State University in California, where we started to blow glass, but we went there as sculpture students. We never really intended to be this involved with glass, and the glass part is a whole story. But back then, what was really popular was minimalist art, and we were looking at each other thinking, how the hell can we become artists in this world? It didn't make any sense at all. Until, of course, when you mature as an artist, you just realize the obvious, which is, of course, you have to give yourself permission to do what you really needed to do, to have a logical progression. And of course, that was precisely the opposite of minimalist art.
We're looking at this work, which is actually the last work that visitors encounter when they're moving through space, but it's actually the earliest work in terms of the chronology of your kind of output. I know that Mia has some questions she wanted to ask about this. We've been talking about it a lot.
So I would love to jump in and start with the title. What can you tell us about, and this work is called Colonial Atmosphere.
Well, we are talking about being in a colonized Americas and so on. We wanted to hearken a little bit to the idea of tourism and seeing a hotel that offers colonial atmosphere. But in this case, of course, is the Olmec head, which is sort of the seminal culture of the Mesoamerica, and the influence the Olmecs had on all the Mayas and the Aztecs is huge. And I think that we wanted to look at it as this capsule of time. So there's a lot of layers and a lot of different ways of looking at it. And of course, here in this case, when we first made this piece was for a show at the USC Fisher Gallery in Los Angeles. And it didn't have that backdrop of the moon or the earth burning. That is a little more of a global warming thing that we've added in the last few versions. Seems to be kind of, and also the idea of the rapture kind of theology of getting out, using things up and seeing and using an escape pod and the billionaires making rockets and all of this stuff. When this world seems to be rather, I don't know, I still like it.
I want to add something about this piece. Also, we're children of the 60s, so seeing the lunar lander on a black and white TV when we're kids in Guadalajara was one of the most momentous moments that you had as a child in the 60s. And but it was kind of like the apex of colonialism, because we were supposed to be colonializing the moon. It seemed like the beginning of actually inhabiting the moon, which of course obviously never happened. And so in a sense is a perfect symbol for the end and the follies of just the idea of being colonialist.
Yeah, kind of a truncated futurism.
And also the fact that it's an Olmec head. The Olmec head is odd because it's cut about the neck, so it makes a perfect capsule. You just have to add the little legs for it.
When you were making this, did you have other kind of variations, other kinds of things like instead of the Olmec head, or was that the original idea?
No, the stuff that's in it is mostly original. It's amazing that it stood. I mean, we didn't make it thinking it's going to be shown 20 plus years later. For a good long time, it was in the backyard, and the boxes might have had a possum and nests.
I have a great question from the audience. Does it drive you more when people say, "What were you thinking?"
Possibly, I don't know. I guess, yeah, or to be in your head. I've heard too. Yeah, I think. I mean, if people are thinking about it, and it does drive you, because obviously it's causing more reaction and more consideration. And that's, I think, as an artist, that's all you can hope for, is to create dialogue.
And speaking of dialogue, another question is, how do the two of you work together as siblings?
We fight.
That is, we have two other brother artists, my oldest brothers,
Really?
and I could never think about collaborating with them. My point is that collaboration is a delicate thing. You have to have complete trust in the process and complete faith. But having said that, at the same time, when you collaborate, you're also released from complete responsibility. So that allows the work to grow as a Frankensteinian thing. It's beyond your control.
I mean, I have to admit, we all were fascinated to watch the two of you work. They were here for almost a month, and just to watch the process, how you work together was fascinating, and how you bring in everybody around you to work with you, and how collaborative the whole process is.
I have to add that the installation team here was fantastic. The best team we ever worked with, easily.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I know there's someone here tonight, so
Several.
Yeah.
yeah, so we're happy to hear that. We're going to move on to this next work. This work would be actually the third work you encounter when you move into the space.
So one of the things, there's several themes that we see throughout the exhibition, and the concept of dark nature, whether it's global warming or, in this instance, these chimera that are somewhat organic, somewhat not. It's something that seems to be kind of ominous and lurking in the work. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I think that we like to look at the darkness of that a nature that humans have, because we all have a little bit of that, and not to hide from it, to see that we're capable of it, or we are monsters. This is a monster movie, and we are the monster, so to speak. And I think we prefer to include ourselves in it, so as to not become sort of a preachy, technology is bad, or, well, I have a cell phone, or, petroleum industry, well, we flew to get here, or we have a car. So we rather talk about these things in terms of being part of it, part of the problem. And that's the way we can maybe talk about, maybe not solutions, but at least think about it a little bit, because ignoring it is not working.
And another question from the audience, how do you find a balance between aesthetics and narrative in your work?
It's a good question. That's a difficult to answer, but I think the simpler answer is we don't work linearly, so the pieces themselves don't have to abide by a straightforward answer and question, because I think we're more successful when two things that might be opposing arguments for the same thing can be explaining the same thing. Like in the same piece, like we're talking about the dark nature on one side and technology on the other side. It's a simple argument, but it's not like they're not different from each other, because we like to think that we are separate from nature, but we're also part of nature, at the same time. And nature is beautiful, and the cycles and everything, but it's also terrible in its own ways. It gives us diseases that can control populations. That's natural.
So one of the key material elements of this are the two big lenticular photographs. And we see the lenticular photographs sort of throughout the exhibition. When did y'all start working with lenticulars, and how did that sort of come to be?
It was in 2009. We had a project in Macla, it's a Latino museum in San Jose, California. And they got an NEA grant. It was their anniversary show, 20 years, I think. And we ran into a lenticular ad in maybe a photo printing place. And we saw that you could have more in the substrate. And as you know, more is more.
We actually could have T-shirts with that on it.
I like that. And so I think we realized that if the substrate can carry not one but two separate narratives, then we thought, yeah, that's what we need to. And also, I think the fact that you can hide a lot of things and that they appear and then they disappear. There's a lot of sort of magic in there, even though it's very analog once you print it. It's one print and has a lens on it, and that's it.
Can we move to we have a slide that has both images, I believe.
Oh, but sorry.
Yes. And so something that's always fascinating. We talk about the process of how the lenticulars, because when visitors view this, there's a familiarity at first. They're like, wait, I've seen something like this. Is this a hologram? But I think what makes the images so complex too is that you have the digital collages that you've created. So yes, exactly, that the substrate is holding so many images at once. And maybe if you could talk about how you borrow from popular culture and all of these different sources throughout art history to, images that could be taken from the headlines.
So let me talk a little bit about lenticular first. When I was a kid in Guadalajara, I had a little television pencil sharpener with a little lenticular image in the 1960s. But lenticular technology is from the 1940s, so there used to be the so-called Winkies that So it's a like you were saying earlier, that is this familiarity with the process that also brings us back to growing up with it. But nowadays, you can do lenticular with complex digital systems that give us this illusion of depth. That's pretty amazing.
And to talk about the imagery, I think that we're a little careful using political stuff like the Miklante Putin guy, because usually things that are political are in cycles, and but Putin has not exactly been a cycle. He seems to be here for the long run. So it's no longer pegged. I mean, I remember way back we made a Donald Rumsfeld, for those of you who remember him, and for a lot of people that was a moment and it's gone, and so we learn that political things are difficult that way, so that the piece can have some more. I think by now Putin's just an icon that has gone beyond. Is generational, really, and of course using the movie poster bad guy. We had him with Quadzilla as a nemesis, and on Quadzilla's. He's the nemesis in the background. So they both have their own movie. They're both the protagonists, and they both are a different type of destruction.
Somebody asked, do you think of your art as pushing boundaries? And are you trying to provoke a certain reaction from viewers?
That is a good question. And I think provoking is not really the aim, although I wouldn't be completely honest if I said that sometimes, you want to provoke. But it isn't really the main motivation of why we do what we do. We do that just because we give ourselves the liberty to do what we want to do at the moment, which might be provoking, yes, and that's part of it.
Yeah, so it's more about freedom. But I mean,
yes.
If I take that question to the next level and say, do you want to get a negative reaction? I would say no, because I think that would be kind of sort of a shallow to try to just make people angry, and I don't think that's a good beginning, much less end for something. If you want to open dialogue, it's actually would close it. But if people do get offended, that's okay too, because since it is about the freedom to do what we think we need to do, then that might happen, and we're deeply sorry.
If you as an artist, in your functions as an artist, you hold a mirror to our culture and society, which is what we do because we're part of the society, that is bound to offend sooner or later.
On the flip side of that, we actually have a few people who are mentioning the sense of play in your work too. So can you talk a little bit about that and how humor comes into the work as well?
Well, I think that we don't take ourselves too seriously to begin with. That's a starting point. But we also see humor as a way to bring people in when we're fighting against these little windows to the world. We have a very tough very tough crowd indeed. And that to grab anybody's attention for a moment, you need to use whatever you have available. And I think that humor is a good hook. But again, it's hopefully a good in, but hopefully there's more to it than a one-liner or some sort of a shallow haha moment. But I mean, laughing is never a bad thing.
And humor is a good metaphor for the ironies of existence and being alive and then not being alive. You know, there's a celestial joke in all this too. So we want to participate.
We're going to move on to the ATT Lobby project, which is a separate project from the exhibition, complements it, and actually went up about 6 months before the exhibition opened. And it was a great way to introduce the brothers' work to our audience here. And it was also inspired by some visits to San Antonio when you came for some kind of early site visits. Let's talk about the influence of San Antonio on this particular piece.
Well, I think that that the colonial idea of colonial, sort of a monument to Spain in a way, that Mexico is littered, and of course, Texas, that was Mexico at one point, it has that sort of background or history. It's hard to get away from that. You know, in California, we have Spanish revival, or what we like to call Zorro architecture. I think we want to hearken that sort of history, but at the same time play with it with some more modern tropes. We did hear that people were into wrestling, and we thought, there's an angle here.
Lucha Libre.
Lucha Libre, yeah. And so the lenticulars all have this. They're based. All those 5 lenticulars that are in the back wall are. They're all based off of Casta paintings, and if you don't know about Casta paintings, look it up. It's pretty interesting and very complex about you know, the sort of paintings done with what races and some awful names that they were well, you know, for the kings and queen in Spain and all that. So we sort of switched that and said, well, the amalgam of races just becomes a stronger. You know, luchador, we're all luchadores, we're all nopaleros, meaning that we're all have this. In fact, the name of this whole thing is we named it Latin exoskeleton, because I think that nopal has a wonderful exoskeleton with spines, and it's a plant that thrives in very harsh environments, and it's delicious.
And the nopal itself is it's a funny thing because it's an easy nationalistic thing for most Mexicans, but it's also used derogatorily in Mexico as designating somebody who's being low class, or somebody who has a nopal nailed to the forehead in Mexico is somebody who's more Indian than white. So it's loaded. It's very loaded.
Very,
in a lot
very
of ways.
harsh. Yeah.
And we were speaking earlier too about, you know, the being on both sides of the border and that in betweenness, and you know, it also harkens to the concept of Nepantla, and that kind of in betweenness, you know, that we experience so much within Chicano culture as well.
Yeah, kind of third space.
Mm-hmm. I am so fascinated by Casta paintings already, and what I really have admired as a thread in the entire exhibition and really in all of your work as I've been getting to know it on a deeper level is this incorporation of so many aspects of art history, from, you know, the Mesoamerican references, you know, Aztec mythology, and all the way up to this, you know, colonial painting type that for a long time was considered to be a little bit more obscure and very it was kind of hidden, right? Because a lot of people who owned these paintings were ashamed to have something that had such a racist history. And now we're, you know, surfacing them again and unpacking what that means. But I wondered if you could talk about how you engage with art history and, you know, those references, because they're used in such an intelligent way throughout the exhibition.
You know, the Casta paintings, take aside those terrible names that they had for the mixes, we're documenting a new human reality, completely new human reality to people mostly in Europe. And they're very curious, you know, what happens when these mixes happen, because they had never happened before. And in that context, as a type of document showing that is is really interesting, actually.
It's futurism.
Yeah.
Really, in a way, it's a futurism. But again, the names notwithstanding, because they're that's where you could really see the horrible racial side to that stuff. But it was somebody was commissioned to document it, so that's also an interesting angle there.
And some people see them and they assume that it means that there was a system of castas implemented, and I mean there were 20 different racial mixes, and the only casta system that there was in colonial times is the white, the mixed, and the Indian. Really,
pretty much, yeah. There was no other divisions in that, so it never worked as such. But I think we see art history as a great. There's just so much stuff to pick from, because it's what humanity has seen important to record and to keep. And that by itself is a very important document in its own right. And to be able to sift through that and pick what you want is I mean, all artists do that in some way, because going back to the collaboration, all artists are collaborating in terms of art history and in terms of the times they're living in. Nobody's a vacuum in that sense. So I think that we have a project also in traveling a show in Europe, and it was really fun to go to those museums and appropriate at will with.
How to reverse some of that colonialism.
Exactly, the backwash.
Someone from the audience asked, do you ever have people who think that you use AI or artificial intelligence in your work? And what are your responses to that, if so?
You know, recently I saw TED Talks where the presenter showed artificial intelligence artwork done by artists with the help of artificial intelligence. And the work was so bad. So for the moment, I'm not worried, but.
But I did hear from somebody recently posted that artist friend of ours, a photographer, that Adobe, what part of the licensing that you don't read is that they're able to use your imagery in any way that they want, and that includes, of course, training AI to make your work inherently. And that I find a bit offensive, actually, and wrong, and patently wrong. But no, I guess it's a compliment if people think we're
going to move on to the first gallery. This is what our visitors see when they walk in. Which we want to talk a little about your whole history with glass and your development of glass in your work and the importance of glass in the work. When did you start working with glass?
Well, I took a job with a lamp work in 1978, so it's a long history, but we never had our own blown glass studio. So like today with blue glass in the morning, but we hadn't in a month and a half. Last time was in Corning.
But you don't have a studio at your studio, a glass facility, right?
Well, we have a small shop, but we don't really turn it on very often because it's an ordeal. It's kind of a big deal to turn it on, and we just prefer to rent time if we need it, or we get a bit of work done in the residencies, or where we'll be teaching in Penland School of Crafts next week, and we'll be making some work then because we teach by example. So when we do a demonstration, we're showing a piece how we make it, and we also will show some of our mixed media techniques to the students.
So we took a class in glassblowing in the early 80s, and I took it in the late 70s. He came in 3 years later, and we're the beneficiaries of the so-called American studio glass movement, which basically designed a glass studio to be used by artists. And if you've ever seen production glass, it's so fast they'd hardly ever reheat things. But when you're making a sculpture, you have to reheat things numerous times. So the studio is designed for artists to make something that would take a really long time and it's complicated. So the studios that we have nowadays, I mean, we were just in Corning, and that was what we'd call the Rolls Royce of glass studios. It was so nice to.
And did you make a lot of pieces?
Yes, a lot of pieces. We're working on a commission for the museum right now. So and that commission took about 30 individually blown pieces.
Yeah, or more, yeah.
And somebody asked, how do you know when a work of art is done?
That's another good question.
Well, when it's full.
So usually we go through the process of laying it all out, and then it gets so crowded, and it takes a long time to be finding the right elements to fabricate a design that seems to flow, because it's, as you know, the negative space is always as important as a positive space. So it has to make sense in terms of design and concept.
So maybe in the beginning it's very additive, but then we start figuring out what's working, and all of the tropes from art school are, alas, they're true. Color theory, design, where your eye moves around, the way that you're sort of manipulating light, all of these things matter, and we're using that to make sense. So even though there may be a lot of materials, it needs to still kind of sing, I think, in some way to us, so that we think it's actually humming together and there's some harmony in the work.
And what we're looking at are these objects that are primarily blown glass, but then they also have these other added elements that are suspended in resin or attached in other ways. I remember when you had first arrived at the museum, we were unpacking crates and putting out different materials. There was this one box, and it was all of these knock-off like Ken dolls. And there was like at least 100 in there. And I thought, what are they going to do with them? And now I know. So I would love to talk about, where do you find these objects, and how do you decide what to use with which project?
We're always looking for stuff. We're not so fond of found object idea, because I think the metaphor of hunting feels better, because you're looking for stuff always actively, and when we're in a swap meet or a thrift store, a lot goes through your mind about what you purchase. Of course, you're always limited to what you can spend your money in, and we have a lot of stuff in the studio.
And we like to think of it as sort of material culture, to use a kind of anthropological term, meaning that these are the byproduct of the consumer society, and these are objects, because of that they're imbued or they represent certain things. We often buy multiples because they can be included in the resin. A lot of these pieces have cast resin bases, and we can throw it in there. And unlike glass, the temperature is not very high, so they won't burn up. Glass, you could never do that with glass. So we love the idea of having a base that has a transparency, and you can look in there and see dolls or all kinds of materials. So very, very specifically chosen, but some of them are chosen for their content and when they have imbued upon them. But there's also a lot that we choose that are strictly for decorative purposes, because we like the decorative arts. That is, craft is part of our dialogue. That's part of our toolbox, and we don't mind having a big homage to the fact that we're crafty.
Do you have a vision of what the final piece is going to look like, or when you start, or does that happen in the process of putting it all together?
That's another good question. We always have a vision of the final piece, but of course we're collaborators. It's going to be a different vision. It's not going to be exactly the same. So, like I said earlier, the pieces tend to gain their own momentum, and they become what they need to become. So I think when we do more complicated installations, we do have to spell out a vision, like with the table, how to construct the table, and the mirror. That was a preordained vision, but once we were here, and gave us a license to set it all up.
And the chandeliers, we'll talk about that in a minute, but especially the way watching the chandeliers come together. But I want to point out, while we're on this slide, is that the heart and cactus work on the far right was one of two that the McNay recently acquired for our permanent collection. So we're glad to have that ongoing here, so people will get to see that ongoing. I also want to mention that the brothers collaborated on every aspect of the installation: wall colors, the placement of every object. So it was truly collaboration, not only in making the works of art, but presenting the works of art.
I think this would also be a great point to address this question. Someone asked, can you talk a little bit about the themes of the exhibition and your work, and then also the dedication of the exhibition?
Yes, the thematically speaking, I think one thing that unites the whole show is a kind of the dark nature, but also the global warming and our relationship to other animals. We're animals and our relationship to other animals, all of that. Because these little creatures that are in this gallery are kind of tonales, which are the sort of spirit animals, if you will. So I think that's something that every single space has a little bit to do with. But the dedication, of course, is of the exhibition is to Tomás Ibarra Frausto, who is here with us. And credited with coining Rascuachismo, which we definitely love and apply ourselves to, and just a champion of artists and the border, and it's a San Antonio jewel.
So we're going to move on to sort of the main attraction of the exhibition. That lovely moment of surprise when people walked down the hall and entered this room.
So there's so many questions that visitors have about this installation, and I would say that it's definitely the space where people kind of stop and linger the most. And even though I have been in this space, spent so much time and was there when it was being put together, I still find myself catching new details. So I wonder if you could just share with everyone how you did this installation, some of how long did it take, and how much of this had you sort of sketched out ahead, and how much of it really kind of came together with a little bit of improvisation?
So this is probably our sixth table that we have done, but this is the largest one by far. So we've been chewing up the idea in our minds for years now to get to this. We started with one in Holland, actually. Remember that one in Leerdam?
And it grew when they went to Lille in France for the art and music festival, Lille 3000 in 2019. When Poland and also Portugal, we did a version. Here, what we did is we had a show, a version smaller, less than half the size, in a show at the ICA in San Diego. And we decided when we were talking about what we were going to do here, we told Renee, you just got to come and see this, because you can get it's not only to see the actual work, but I think it's to get the idea of how we work also. And I think it worked well, because I think Renee figured out that if we had a little bit of wiggle and freedom, and sure enough that we asked if we could do this or we couldn't do that, and I mean just the wonderful taxidermy in the San Diego.
Someone did ask, is the taxidermy real?
Oh wow! Well, it's a good question. Is taxidermy real? So in San Diego, the ICA is in the Balboa Park, which also has the Natural History Museum, and they were very keen on working with us with lending the pieces to us, but they couldn't lend them for a further showing, and so here we needed to get local ones, and luckily Lauren's uncle lent us all of these wonderful, I mean astonishingly amazing pieces that really are big enough to be part of a space this size, because smaller creatures would precisely look smaller, and some of those are pretty grandiose, even a bear. But I think the dialogue was we had a very open dialogue about what we could and couldn't do, and I think that since we already collaborate, for us it's very simple for us to pivot and say, can we hang chandeliers? And that was a green light. So we're like, well, we've never made chandeliers. Let's become chandelier makers then. And so on. And then we're like, well, they needed to put a little base to keep people from actually picking up the pieces. Because I know in San Diego, the little kids would grab the artwork, and they were very much against that. So we decided to coat that with a mirror so that it would become the opportunity of seeing the under the table. And that was a whole other, and that comes out through the dialogue of what we were doing and what the limitations were. And that just opens up other doors, as opposed to, we're definitely not interested in shutting doors.
Somebody did ask, what could you not do?
Glass clowns.
Yeah, glass clowns.
Glass
Yeah,
clowns.
we have yeah.
But we probably will do that anyway.
And we haven't made a bong. We've been asked if we make bongs. I've never, ever. Maybe it was Chong. Maybe it was Chong. Maybe.
Let's talk about the chandeliers, because you did make them for this project, and you said you hadn't made chandeliers before, and those seem to be like you had this the vision of what these are going to look like. We had no idea what that vision was, but we did keep see them kind of evolve, but they have a very particular sort of narrative that goes along with the chandeliers, especially these with the arms.
These arms we made for a project we did for Insight in 1997, which is a installation art festival in San Diego and Tijuana that is no longer, but it ran for 15 years or so. And we made a very large pyramid in Centro Cultural de Tijuana, and these arms were sort of poking out of it with the bottles, and we sort of like wine buying. It's a rebellion, but yet with wine bottles, kind of like a maybe a chic rebellion. I don't know. We're a bougie rebellion. So we'd use these arms. We had the casts already, the mold for them, and you just, instead of doing them in plaster like we did in '97, my brother cast them in foam and plastics so that they're a lot lighter. But we did want the chandeliers. It was very important that they took enough visual space because the room is gigantic. I mean, that space is 45 by 60 feet or so, and that is it's a tall order.
So you mentioned the arms that are part of the chandelier, and we see other body parts throughout this installation. And I know we've gotten questions throughout the tours that we give about this aesthetic. Is it coming from gory and horror kind of movies, or is it is everybody missing the point when they're so focused on, the red substance and the body parts, and thinking that it's dark? Is it all supposed to be, a delicious dinnerscape or dessert? We'd love to hear you and explain to everyone a little bit more about that.
You mean the cannibalism part of it?
Yes, that part.
That part. Yeah, I mean, it is presumably the table of the ultra wealthy. So in a way, we do eat the poor countries and the poor people. So there is cannibalism metaphorically. Yeah.
And it's actually a sweet sauce. It's not blood. and the black stuff is oil, which, I mean, we're in Texas.
So I do want to point out, as we heard, that the taxidermy was sourced locally, and some of the other objects, and then you also incorporated furniture that was originally in the McNay residence, which often doesn't get seen. So it was really great that art history became then part of this installation. And talk about just the idea of I know you went into storage and got to kind of pick and choose from all the various things we had, and how that informed how this ended up.
Well, the origin of art museums is a sort of cabinet of curiosities. It's somebody going around the world and bringing things home and displaying them. That is how museums started. And I think that it's a nod to that, both, the good thing, because we obviously love and need museums, and here we are. But on the other hand, of course, there's the museums that are repatriating works and from pieces that were appropriated. I know the Victoria and Albert Museum is going through some pretty heavy stuff because they have like a little bit of Greece and a little bit of many countries, and of course it's complicated. Is what I'm saying. It's I think that we like to. Our work is both about a nod in one way, but also seeing that all the complications of what these things mean. By the same token that we're talking about a table of the rich that looks like a party, but we also we're both disgusted, but kind of wish we were invited, because if I was invited, then I wouldn't be disgusted. So it's, and all of those feelings that are kind of not necessarily, they're counterintuitive. There's a lot of counterintuitivity. And I think we thrive on that counterintuitivity.
I think that the connection to Lady McNay, having used that furniture herself, it's pretty sweet, really, to be able to get that permission.
A connection, yeah. It's a huge connection.
And somebody asked, when you were setting the table, did you imagine the people that were seated there, that were invited to this party?
Well, the idea with the table is the voyeuristic part of it, and I think also the familiarity, because we all been to dinner parties, and of course, you could. We wanted to make it feel like you could actually partake, like entice you to partake. It seems easy. It would be easy to just sit down and be part of the revelry that the table shows, right?
Yeah, in Lille, we actually put the wine into the cheap wine into the glasses and let it dry up, and that a sort of acrid smell of yesterday's party was part of their that version. I don't think they wanted us to do
I was
that.
gonna say, that's one of the things. That was one of the things you couldn't do.
You know, a little scratch and sniff going on. Well, yeah.
But I did like the way you kind of went crazy with the gold leaf and started applying it to everything.
Well, it's a way to blur things a little bit, because it becomes the aesthetic of money. And then this backdrop here, that's gold and black background. You can see the positive in those ovals. That is a tile from Porto in Portugal, azulejo, or azulejo. And what it is that it's in negative. So all it is an inverted wall from one of the important spaces in Porto. And those ovals are actually showing the image in its appropriate way. But the backdrop, the blue and white turned into gold and black, which I thought was perfect in a weird way, because it was also kind of a feeling of black lacquer and opulence, and it took it away from such a direct obviousness of the azulejo.
We don't have a detail of the other wallpaper, but could you just talk a little about the other wallpaper? Because you designed all of these for this project.
Right. Yeah, the other wallpaper has started with a roof, a ceiling in a church in Braga, also in Portugal, that has all those flourishes. You can kind of see a little bit on the right side of the screen. It just was very, very beautiful and opulent and floral. And we added some brains into it, I believe. It's maybe some teeth with braces. It's just, again, aesthetic decisions, no cannibalism.
So we were wondering, so what's next? What's next for the Torre Brothers?
Other than scratch and sniff.
Taxidermy. Right now, we're doing the commissions. We're doing some commission work. The Seattle Tacoma Airport, we have a commission with them. We're doing a very large microscope for outdoor sort of pop art microscope for the county health in San Diego. And we're doing the commission for a permanent piece for the Corning Museum. So those three things are very much in the forefront. Future shows, maybe Arte Abierto in Mexico City. We've been putting that off too much. I think we have to do. That's a very big space, not unlike the Tobin Gallery. So it's a tall order, and we just.
And another one in Puebla.
In Puebla, yeah, in Amparo, Museo Amparo.
And that space is very much like a cube. It's a huge cube. So we were thinking about developing the chandelier into just being the main piece, a big giant chandelier. So that's the direction we want to take it.
And then talk about this documentary. We're showing just a clip here on the title wall of the exhibition, which, one of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on here at the McNay is how we work with artists, living artists. And we also want to get the face of the artist out there, so people see that those objects that they're enjoying in the galleries are made by real people, living people, right? So we're able to show this clip, this documentary, and how. Talk a little about that and where that project is.
So as Isaac Artenstein, which is a documentary filmmaker at the border, has done some pieces on like the Jews, Latin American Jews in New Mexico, and other. I mean, he's done a lot of. He wanted to do something on just border artists, and he approached us. We thought, of course, we could be part of this. That's the third. That's a third space is the border, after all. And we thought, well, sure. But we had the show at the Cheech Museum, and he visited, and he thought, oh no, I have to do a whole thing on you guys now. And so he stopped the other project and sort of became this. So right now what that is just a demo, and he's trying to do a full hour. In the next month, I think you might hear from the NEH on a grant, and he's trying to get the funding to do the full deal. Canal 22, which is kind of like the PBS of Mexico and PBS in the US and all that. So great guy, and I think he's a very, very good filmmaker.
And you were also judges on a television show, right?
Yeah. So Netflix has a series for glassblowers called Blown Away. And they asked us to be judges on the first one, second one. Finally, we said yes on the fourth one. That was about a year ago, and it's out. And we're just guest judges on episode 8. It turns out that the reality TV is not real. But still, it's a lot of fun, and if you've never seen glass, it's a way to get introduced to glass blowing, and a lot of people quite love the show, and it was fun.
Do we have any more questions from our audience here?
We've received so many wonderful questions from the audience, so I just also want to thank everybody for their participation and for asking these great questions.
Great. Well, we're approaching the hour, so I want to thank you both for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. And we want to thank our great audience here and all the great questions we got. And so have a good evening and enjoy the show, and send all your friends through September 15th. All right, thank you.